thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for our speakers that Kai will present in a minute. I don't want to take too much of your time. It's our great honor. And please, any question you have, feel free to put it in the chat. Thank you.
So with that, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists who are joining us today. They'll just give a brief introduction to start out, just about their background, the work they do with their respective organizations. So the panelists who are joining us today are Roy Homri, the head of street work field at ELEM Youth in Distress Israel, Jen Williams, senior development manager at Covenant House, New Jersey, and Bill Strickland Jr., founder and executive chairman of Manchester Bidwell Corporation. And with that, I'll pass it on first to Roy, just to give your introduction to start out.
Hello, good evening to you all. I'm very moved and excited to be here. And I also want to thank NBLkin, who actually established ELEM in 1986. So I'm very honored for you to be here as a guest in this panel. So thank you for joining. My name is Roy Homri. I've been in ELEM for the past 17 years and started as a volunteer. I now, as said earlier, head of street work field, meaning I'm in charge of 23 teams who works at approximately these days 30 cities all across Israel with all parts of Israeli society, teams who go out in the nighttime to meet the youth and young adults who are in the streets. Started in ELEM as a volunteer in 2004, and as the years passed by, I just moved up the chain. I live in Tel Aviv. I have two lovely sons, ages 6 and 4, and a spouse. And yeah, ELEM is the largest NGO that works with youth in distress in Israel. It has been working with youth in distress for the past 36 years. Started in New York, as I said earlier, by NBLkin, and now and brought knowledge from the US to Israel, methods of work. And by now we are the leading NGO that work with youth and also develop new method of works with youth and young adults in distress. And again, very excited to be here, and I'll expand later on about coronavirus and how we deal with things. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. So good evening and good early morning to some of you. My name is Jen Williams. I am currently the senior director or senior development manager for Covenant House, New Jersey specifically. For those of you that aren't aware, Covenant House is an organization that serves homeless and at-risk young people between the ages of 18 and 21. And we've been operating since 1972 in 31 cities across the United States, Canada, and Central America. I've had the privilege of serving with Covenant House in New Jersey since 1997. Oh goodness, so 24 years, and have done a lot of different things. I hail from right outside of Philadelphia, currently live in New Jersey with my husband, my dog, and my 2 happy cats. And it has been a privilege to serve a population that I did not know existed before I started. To me, homeless were older folks. They were veterans. You know, I had a very preconceived idea of who was homeless, but to find out that there were young people, just a few years younger than me when I started, who were homeless and on the streets, mostly through no fault of their own, really touched my heart. And so I have stayed committed to the work and serving these young people in various capacities over the years. And it's my privilege to share a little bit of my experience tonight with you all, and hopefully help to inspire and enlighten you about the work that each of us panelists do representing our own organizations, and maybe give you all some insight and some ideas of how you can continue to support us. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jen. And last but not least, Bill, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Bill Strickland, and I've basically been doing this work essentially in my neighborhood where I was born. So my life story is 6 city blocks. But I've devoted my life and my center to working with people who are poor, African American, inner city for sure. And what we have done is we have built 10 centers, starting with Pittsburgh. And I've committed myself to the philosophy that homeless people are assets in disguise. They're not liabilities. And I'm committed to the concept that we have to get homeless people out of the dark and into the sunlight and let them know that the sun is for everybody on the planet, not just rich kids. So I am a big believer in environment. And so I hired a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I built a Frank Lloyd Wright inspired environment in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh to get people who were poor into world-class facilities. Our facility in Pittsburgh was the scale model for the Pittsburgh airport. And it's become a spectacular representation of how we've been able to partner with Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies to get people aligned with skill sets that can get them out of being homeless and unemployed and gainfully employed. The idea has caught on. The Harvard Business School has tracked us for the last 10 or 15 years. And as the result, we've now built 9 other centers around the world, including one in Israel for Arab and Jewish children in Akko, Israel. It's doing well. We have a waiting list to get in the place. And so the other 9 centers are getting the same outcomes as we're getting in Pittsburgh. And we think we're on to a very big idea. Right now, we have early conversations in Puerto Rico, Vancouver. We're going to Belfast, Ireland to do this work with Catholics and Protestants. And so we think on our way to taking this model to any city in the world that's interested in talking with us about alleviating the conditions of homeless people wherever they are found.
Thank you so much, Bill. And I'm so excited to expand on all the things you all have already shared. I guess before I launch into my first question, I did want to remind anyone who's in the audience, please feel free to submit any questions you have for our panelists in the chat. I'll try to set aside some time towards the end of the event to make sure that we get to them and they can, answer any questions you might have. But I'd love to sort of start out with this sort of broad question, which just touches every facet of everything now, which is how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the work you all do, and what adjustments have you had to make in supporting homeless youth and youth in distress during this time? Roy, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, for start, we were forbidden to go out to the street. At the beginning of COVID, it was not a matter of choice whether we can or cannot go out to the street. It was by law forbidden to go to the street. Situation here in Israel was that NGOs were not defined as critical services, so we weren't allowed to be out in the street, and there was the quarantine. So we had to find legal ways to be out in the street. We used some Israeli chutzpah, and we managed to went out to the streets to track down and locate all the youth that were at the street. I think that this was one of the most significant things that we had to deal with at the beginning. I think that next was the fact that everyone were allowed to stay at their homes as what was supposed to be, or what is for most people, the safest environment, while youth and young adults that we work with does not have homes as a safe environment. They might have home to stay in. So we needed to find new ways to track them down because they weren't able to be in the street. They're in the streets, they weren't at their homes. So we needed to find new ways to track them down and give them services and let them know that we are also out and that we are looking for them. So it has forced us to work more on the internet and the social media. And I think that those were the 2 main challenges that affected our work. I think that the third one was the tension between self-preservation of the staff, volunteers and workers, and fulfilling our mission at those times. I think that that was a main challenge, and the coronavirus, since ELEM is a volunteer-based organization, we have 2,000 volunteers and 280 employees. So some of our volunteers could not volunteer because of COVID. They were at high risk population, or they had someone at their homes who were high risk, and they could not volunteer anymore. So this also forced us to find new resources in order to serve aid for the teens and young adults who are in the streets. Yeah.
Bill, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about how the pandemic has affected the work you do?
Well, yes. One, we're virtual, like most people in the world these days. But the other thing I've done in my center in Pittsburgh, we have a major component in the arts. And what we have discovered is that poor people and homeless people, the worst part of being poor, in my view, is what it does to your spirit. And so we have used the arts as a strategy to rekindle life and hope in people who have felt that they have lost it. And it's provided a great opportunity for people who were considered incapable of creativity and innovation to put them in ceramics and photography and digital imaging. And these young people are doing extraordinary things. And the skill sets that they're learning, we believe will be transferable to economic opportunity, because a lot of the people in our 3D imaging program, for example, that can transfer into the medical industry or the drawing and computer industry, et cetera. So the arts is a component of what we believe in. The other piece is that we have built a world-class culinary program, and we take people, some of whom are homeless, and we put them in a world-class culinary program. But the other thing we do is feed them, because it's very difficult to teach people when they're hungry. So we don't do fast food, we do gourmet food. So all of our students get a gourmet lunch every day that they're enrolled in the summer. And what we've discovered is the food is good for their stomach, but it's better for their spirit. And so food and sunlight are part of the equation that we believe is universal and is replicable no matter where you find those conditions in the world.
So could you talk a bit about how those sort of programs were affected during this time? I know you mentioned that everything has sort of gone virtual. What did that look like for you all?
Well, what we've done is in our ceramics program, for example, we're teaching ceramics via computer. We have the kids with a pile of clay and artistic tools, and we actually coach them via computer. And they do projects at their homes. They bring them in, we fire them in a high fire kiln. So they have takeaway projects that they have created literally through a computer. And we are also now beginning to do this with our jazz program, because we also have a jazz program and we do jazz recording, but we're now recruiting students to participate in that program as well, so that we can harvest some of their musical aptitudes and interest areas in that as well. So we're doing music virtually, and we're doing ceramics virtually, and we're doing photography virtually. And so far, that has generated quite a bit of enthusiasm by our students, and we have a waiting list literally to get into the program. So we think we've touched on an important nerve, and we believe that culture is really driving our strategy.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. And I guess, Jen, would you tell us a bit about how Covenant House in New Jersey sort of pivoted during this time?
Yes, many different ways, I will say, and it has changed almost monthly since March. So I think one of the biggest challenges that that not only Covenant House New Jersey, but Covenant Houses across the country had to face was, how do we keep our young people safe and our staff safe while trying to maintain safe protocols and guidelines within a congregational living situation. So each of the sites across our federation has multiple young people living in it. So how do we maintain social distancing and mask wearing, and how do we keep our staff feeling safe? So I know that each site adopted some similar protocols and some different ones, but specifically for New Jersey, we kind of put a pause on our intake process, meaning we didn't shut down any of our services. We maintained being able to house youth, but we had to take some time and not bring in anybody new for a while until we could figure out safe guidelines and how to operate. And then again, every few weeks, these guidelines change, but initially we had to develop screening questions to ask our young people, where have they been living? Has anyone close in proximity to they had been living tested positive for COVID? Had they had testing? Are they symptomatic? Those kinds of things. Another challenge for us specifically here in New Jersey was that we were under a quote unquote lockdown, not as strict, at least as it sounds, as my fellow panelists in Israel had to deal with. But essentially, there were no businesses open, so our young people were not getting jobs. And in order to maintain, or in order to move forward and save money, they need employment. So many of our youth were stuck in a holding pattern of not being able to move forward. And that was a real challenge. It was a challenge for our staff to try to keep spirits lifted, what Bill alluded to, especially when their entire lives were already upended by being homeless in the first place. You know, being homeless is traumatic enough. Add on top of that a global pandemic that nobody really saw coming or knew how to prepare for or how long it would be. There were so many unanswered questions. I will say that it challenged us to go through this process with our young people together, and to try as a staff to also maintain our own spirits. Are our families safe? You know, how do we keep the shelter running and some kind of programming going, and feeling safe ourselves about coming to work and then going back to our families. So I won't go into all the minutia of the myriad of things that we've had to change, but I will say that we have gotten more into a rhythm now, almost a year in, and our lights are on, our doors are open, and we are very, very thankful that we've been able to bring in people back, new young people, and continue to house them throughout this crisis.
Thank you for sharing. And I know that we've sort of touched on this in this previous question, but I was interested in learning a bit more about how you all have sort of pivoted to, you know, virtual services where relevant, and what that might have looked like for you all, and to what degree that you've engaged in that, and what sort of challenges there are associated with having to connect possibly with youth in a remote capacity, relying on technology. Would you like to start, Jen?
Sure. So I think the biggest component for us was our having to pause on our volunteers, similar to what Roy had to do. So all of our volunteer services have now gone virtual, and that's presented a real challenge. The young people really like to hear other voices than ours on a regular basis. So to have folks in their local community that are willing to invest their time and their talents in them, but then not having that was a real withdrawal. The other piece of that, even though we did switch to a virtual platform, is that specifically for New Jersey, many of the spaces within our site are pretty small. So in order to maintain proper safety guidelines, we had to have youth 6 feet apart, but also masked. And if you can imagine this Zoom call with all of us wearing masks and trying to engage in meaningful dialogue, it was a real challenge. I know for me, I Zoomed in from home to teach a workshop to youth, and it was very hard to hear. It was hard to read facial expressions, and it was hard to make that meaningful connection where a young person feels like they're being seen and heard. We have tried consistently to make it work and tried different things to make it better. One of those being that someone graciously donated an abundance of laptops so that we could outfit each youth with their own screen, put them in separate locations throughout the building, and everybody Zoom in individually so they didn't have to be masked and they didn't have to socially distance. And that way it could create a more meaningful dialogue with the volunteer. But that's been one of our biggest challenges with technology.
Roy, could you tell us a bit about, to what degree you all have had to, pivot to relying more on technology? What does that sort of look like at ELEM?
Well, let me start by saying that ELEM has a branch that work only in the virtual surrounding. It gives support within the virtual world of the teenage. It has proactive tools, technological tools to track down youth in distress by using analyzing of keywords that might show distress. And it also have group sessions within, whether it's on Facebook or on our own platforms. So we have this branch. It has been existed for the past 12 years and evolving as technology evolves. What happened through COVID is that it gives us opportunity. I think that Jennifer mentioned earlier that COVID had a lot of challenges and a lot of difficulties, but also a lot of opportunities. So it actually pushed us as an organization forward to learn more about technologies and tools that we actually had within the organization. And I think that the main evolution that we had was using the social platforms in order to track down teenagers. In Israel, Instagram is the largest social media networks that teenagers uses. I know that in the US, and TikTok, obviously. And I know that in the US, Snapchat is also quite big, but here is less. So we started going through the social media networks, tracking down teenagers, addressing them, seeing signs of distress, whether it was analyzing pictures that we saw, live blogging that we saw, TikTok movies that we saw that expressed distress. It's amazing how free they feel within the social media. So we enhance the amount of use that we do in social media in order to create contact with teenagers and youth in distress. And then we have developed method in order to transform the connection from C2C or M to M, mobile to mobile, to a face-to-face encounter, which was still is a challenge. But as time moved, we created more and more methods of how to send the right message, when to send the right message, how to create a motivation of the teenage to come and meet us within the street in order to serve aid or address him or her to some medical center or a harm reduction center. So I think that this was the main evolution that we had using digital platforms due to the COVID. And in a way, I actually thanks the COVID in pushing us forward in this line of method, because I think it's here to stay in a way. So it has created a tremendous change, and it's here to stay when it comes to using those platforms.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will say, as someone who's spoken with a lot of different, nonprofit leaders and staff over the past year, that definitely seems to be a recurring theme, is that, despite everything, there's some impressive things different organizations have learned to do with technology that they'd like to carry through beyond the crisis. If that, Bill, I'd like to transition in case you have, anything else to add on what the sort of virtual work has looked like for you all, but also, to transition a bit in talking about, what would you say are the biggest challenges that, at-risk youth are facing right now during this time, on either of those subjects, if you have any thoughts.
Well, we built our center around innovation and being creative. And that is why the jazz program that we created has become almost legendary, because the music of jazz is based on improvisation. And so what I did was basically put the jazz people in the middle of the conversation and use the philosophy of our music as our cultural strategy for all the other programs in our school. That has proven to be very effective. The other thing I did was I allowed our directors to come up with their own solutions to their unique problems, because I believe in management by following the staff, not leading the staff. And that has become our culture, and it has proven to be very successful. And we've also discovered that survival is a very powerful motivation for becoming innovative. Meaning, if you don't have an idea about how to survive, you probably won't. So what we have been gratified to see is that the staff of our center, of which we have 120 people working full time, have come up with their individual strategies and have applied those strategies to the individual programs. And we have waiting lists to get into every program almost virtually and without any formal method of communication other than the computer. So we know that this will work, but it is based on a philosophy of trusting your staff, believing in your students, and treating both as assets that are a big part of the solution of the problem. The other thing I really strongly believe in is that this kind of strategy is not just unique to us. I believe that this is being experienced by every center that we have been associated with, particularly in cities like Akko, Israel, where the students, the Arab students and the Jewish students, have found a reason to live rather than a reason to die. It's very exciting, and we are excited about the prospects of what the future is going to look like for people who are, regardless if homeless or without hope. And we think that that is not true, that there is this better solution lying ahead. And the energy that we're harvesting on this conference, for example, we think is much needed medicine for the human spirit.
All right. I guess, Bill, just to continue with you for a minute, I mean, could you talk a bit about how the youth you all work with are being affected by the pandemic, and what are, you know, some of the greatest challenges they're facing, the struggles they're facing? Could you tell us a bit about what you've seen?
Yes, I've seen a lot of drug addiction, to be very direct, and a lot of depression, almost clinical depression. These children are frightened, they're hungry, they're alone, and they don't believe that their circumstances are going to change anytime soon, because they believe that the world has basically turned its back on them. And they believe this, even though the evidence that you and I might experience wouldn't suggest that that's true. I believe it is true. And depression is a big part of why I think these people, the children, turn to opiates, try to find some relief through mechanical aspects of drug addiction, et cetera. But I believe that if you can restore hope and you can restore confidence in these children that life is worth living, I think that is 50% of the down payment on how we can change this this strategy. And I think the trajectory of these children's lives. I do not believe that that's an accident. I think that's a deliberate strategy that can be resourced, in my opinion, all over the world.
Jen, you know, to what degree did these sort of challenges, you know, mirror what you've seen at Covenant House, and are there other sort of, you know, pieces of this that, you know, youth are struggling with during this time?
Yes, so it's very similar to what Bill had said. I think uniquely for our Covenant House site in Atlantic City, because we are a seasonal town, and the majority of the time, the young people that come to us are able to obtain employment in the service industry, whether it's restaurants or down in Atlantic City, we have casinos where you have a lot of frontline staff. When shutdowns occurred, that was, you know, a lot of those jobs were eliminated. many small businesses, even when rules were lifted and we were allowed to bring folks back at perhaps 25% capacity at a restaurant, many of the small businesses were not able to maintain. And so a lot of those jobs that would normally go to our young people are either non-existent or are going to more experienced workers. So it has been a real challenge for our young people to find employment that is able to sustain them in an independent living environment. So that has been a tough challenge for them to try to overcome. We have had some successes, but we're hoping that the restrictions will continue to be lifted as our COVID numbers drop in the States, and that meaningful employment, sustainable employment for independents will continue to rise, those opportunities. Another challenge has been the number of young people that have lost family members to COVID and haven't been able to attend funerals or go see them in a hospital, kind of emphasizing what Bill had said. What a terrible dilemma to be in, to be homeless, to be in a homeless shelter and know that your loved one is going to pass away and you can't see them or say goodbye. And so it's presented us with different kinds of challenges to be supportive to our young people in a way that we perhaps hadn't needed to be before. But it's also given us a real opportunity to grow and learn as a staff and to try to connect with our young people in a different way. Again, I think the fact that we are all going on this new journey together has been something that has helped us and helped our youth better connect through this hard time. And to be able to say, we're all having it tough and we're going to get through this together. There's a spirit of unity, I believe, that has been fostered since the beginning of this, but still challenging for sure for many people, but for homeless youth and youth facing homelessness, definitely for sure.
Roy, could you tell us a bit about how the youth you've seen and worked with are dealing with this pandemic, and what are the biggest challenges they're facing?
Well, I think that well, there are several main challenges, if I may. One was that the coronavirus was so big and so dramatic that it is shaking everybody and everyone. And in a way, the weakest link became even weaker, meaning that all of those young and homeless individuals, which had, in the good case, lack of support system, and in the worst case, none, just find themselves with no surviving skills in this new reality. Jennifer mentioned working places, but if we talk even of other surviving methods like street prostitution, if someone uses his or her body in order to survive, they could not do it anymore because there weren't any kind of street prostitution because no one was in the street. If someone is scavenging for food, he or she could not scavenge for food because restaurants are closed. If someone collects bottles in order to survive, they could not collect bottles. So just think of that, for example, for the most weakest link to become even more weak because their surviving skills weren't effective at this time. So this is one group. The other group were people that were just about to go on the right track, but since they had low amount of support system, they could not survive it, the rounds time after time for a long period of time. We have a significant amount of teenage moms who usually do not have support system. So as soon as the education system are being shut down due to the COVID, and it doesn't matter whether it's a national thing or whether the specific kindergarten is being closed due to someone who was exposed to the COVID virus. She usually does not have someone to keep the baby or keep the kid throughout daytime, so she cannot go to work, so she don't have money. So the rapid pace of her going from someone who has an apartment, which took some time to get the apartment, to get the job, to start going on the right track. So the rapid pace that she fell down again to being in an actual hunger situation, her and her kid, was dramatic. I think that in the beginning, we kind of predicted what we are about to see, because due to some other reasons in Israel, security situations, we had several cases of some areas in Israel being on a lockdown for security reasons for weeks. And we've learned to find out that after people go out from the homes, we see what happened throughout those stressful times at home. The increasing of self-harm, the increasing of domestic violence, whether it's physical, sexual, verbal, all of them within the homes. So we predicted that there's going to be an increase. I should say that we have not predicted how dramatic the increase would be. If you compare the numbers from 2019 to 2020, domestic violence and violence in general has not tripled, but multiplied by 4. When we see the numbers, like 400% more than what we see on a normal year. Self-harm has doubled itself. Alcohol and substance abuse between tripled or doubled itself again. So all of these are also expression of the stress that teenagers, young adults are experiencing throughout COVID. And in a way, sorry for being pessimistic, I think that the worst is yet to come, because the educational system here in Israel is still closed or working partly. So there are no significant adults' eyes that look on those kids. There's no one to see if they're coming on a daily basis to the schooling system. No one sees them. How do they close well? Are they being fed? How they are? We have lack of adults' eyes to look at the young people. And I think as soon as the schooling system will reopen, things are not gonna get worse, but we could see we would have a better picture of what has been going on and what is going on within those teenagers' life, especially those in distress. And we would have to develop methods in order to serve aid, not just in the numbers that we are used to, but in a much larger scale.
Right. And I guess, just sort of summarizing a lot of the things you've discussed as some of the major problems, like, worsening mental health, the economic distress, substance abuse, and so on. What sort of ways have your organizations pivoted, started new programs, or otherwise just changed approaches to make sure you're meeting those sort of growing needs during this time? Jennifer, would you like to start?
Sure. I know one of the things that we're very thankful for is a quickly developed telehealth system. So to be able to access beyond the therapy that we're able to provide in-house, to be able to connect with service providers outside of our walls who are able to zoom in and check in on our young people on a regular basis, and also give them just an outlet to be able to talk and share their feelings, things like that. Not only in the areas of mental health, but I feel like many of our youth that went to different programs throughout the day, maybe to help manage a drug or alcohol issue, have been able to provide, at least virtually, those support systems. So we're thankful for that. But it has been a challenge. It has been a challenge. I think that we have tried to do a lot of different creative things. We've also been able to share resources more so with the other covenant houses throughout our federation. So this opportunity has afforded us to connect on a larger scale, probably closer than we have been before. So perhaps I'll give you an example of something that really helped to lift our young people's spirits. We have a partnership with the New York Giants, which is a professional football team here in New Jersey or New York, however you however you designate the team. And they have adopted Covenant House as their charity of choice, specifically Saquon Barkley. I believe I think he's a quarterback. I don't know. I should know this. Anyway, they provided several Zoom calls for our young people to help share lunch, to provide just some general support. And so every site across the state was able to Zoom in and appreciate that. Whereas in a pre-COVID world, they would probably just have gone to our Newark shelter. Now everyone across the state was able to ask them questions and interact with them. And it was a real lift to their spirits. We've been able to Zoom in just different people, celebrities, guests throughout the country, just different kinds of folks. And so I think that even the novelty of something different that our young people aren't used to was a lift to their spirits, at least temporarily. And so we're continuing to try to find innovative ways to deal with these issues. The employment piece, I will say, because many folks are staying at home, folks meaning professionals and adults, DoorDash and Uber Eats and a lot of those jobs that weren't as abundant as before are now being open to our young people, and they pay pretty well. So it's opened the doors to different job opportunities that normally hadn't existed in a COVID world. We're hoping that continues, and as we move forward through this.
And Roy, what are your thoughts on how you all have sort of pivoted to reach youth and tackle their greatest needs right now?
So one of the main challenges, I think I mentioned it earlier, was, and if not, so I'll say it right now, was in this time advocating for the needs of young adults and teenagers in distress. Because of all the COVID and all the chaos and the news, and you had elections, we are about to have elections. So this kind of subject or topic was not that popular on regular days, was pushed even more down on these days. But we put a lot of press in advocating for the needs and the situation of youth in distress throughout the past year. And we succeeded in pushing the state of Israel to put some money to increase the amount of teams that go out to the street. Actually, 2 months ago, the Ministry of Welfare here in Israel allowed 240 teams to go out on a weekly basis in different cities in Israel in order to track down and meet young adults and teenagers in distress, which is dramatic. ELEM itself operates 70 teams on a weekly basis on a regular year, and the Ministry of Welfare added additional 240 teams. It's dramatic, and I think it will allow us to bring a better pictures of the situation and the needs that are in the streets. Those teams are being spread in the ultra-Orthodox communities, in the Arab communities, in the Bedouin communities, all over Israel. So it's going to give us a better picture of what is the situation in order to create a much better solutions to those teenagers and young adults. We also managed to expand the amount of shelters that work 24/7. We tripled them, which also is a huge accomplishment for us in this time. And I think that we are now trying to develop a set of skills to the educational teams within the schools in order to manage to notice signs of whether it's domestic violence, self-harm, and other situations of stress that teenagers might deal with in order to prepare the field to the day when the teenager will come back to the schooling system. So this is the other main thing that we are working at right now.
And I guess just quickly, I want to make sure you have a time to answer, Bill, before we wrap up. Could you tell us a bit about how you all sort of pivoted to make sure you're you know, addressing the greatest needs that, you know, the youth are facing right now that you mentioned, you know, during the pandemic?
For me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, the best way to figure out what the youth need is to go ask them. I believe in the power of building programs based on the need of the customer. The customer in this case are the homeless youth that we work with. And so we have developed an opportunity and a dialogue with the very students who we're in business to work with and save. And we will base our curriculums on what they need, not what we think they need, and how one manages the programs. The other thing I would say is Jennifer and Roy and I have an obligation to build centers that are stable, because one of the terrible things about homelessness is the temporary lives that homeless people live. They can never predict where the next meal's coming from, where the next hug's coming from, where the next attaboy's coming from, et cetera. And so we believe that building institutions that are based on concrete administration and financial stability is absolutely important to building the confidence of our people to participate and to give them the real belief based on reality that they have lives to lead, that the story of their life is just beginning, it's not at the end. And I believe that that's true for anybody that wants to take it upon themselves to work in this space, because these are people who have become professionals at denying themselves hope. And I believe if we're going to be in this business, we have to be in it to stay, and we have to be in it to make sure that we recognize that for us, it's a life sentence. And I believe that that should be a non-negotiable feature of the work that we do.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for the questions today, but appreciate all the time that our panelists have dedicated to this, and thank you so much to everyone in the audience who's also taken the time to participate in this discussion and listen to you know, everything we have to say. And with that, I'm not sure, Miriam, if you have any other final remarks worth mentioning, but
just on behalf of the Consulate General of Israel in New York, I want to thank our inspirational speakers tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for being leading experts in your field and organization. And hopefully we get to visit and see you once this is all over. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Kay, for moderating this panel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Good luck.
Good night.